All right, everyone. I do apologise for that. For those few of you who have managed to join, I am so sorry about the tech issues that are delaying getting started. We expect quite a few more folks to come along, but as happened last week, it looks like we're having link problems. So some people are able to get through with the links that we've sent out, and other people are having problems, and then using the same link when it's resent does work. And I have not enough tech knowledge myself to understand why that is happening. But we'll get started, and hopefully anyone else who wants to come along will be able to join with the information that I've just sent. Other than that, we will get started. So I am Kelly Sumner. I'm in the Sector Workforce Planning and Development team here at QCOSS, and we've been off around the state and online delivering workshops and webinars all about developing strong tender applications, particularly focused on Skilling Queenslanders for work, although as in all our tender writing and grant writing workshops, what we discuss is generally good practice across a whole lot of grants and tender opportunities. We're really grateful to be joined today by our senior data analyst here at QCOSS, Amy Dellett, who will be taking you through demonstrations and talking about the more technical sides of using data. First, of course, though, we want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people dialing in today and the custodians of the lands that we are on, but also the lands that you're on. And if you would like to make an acknowledgement of the country that you're on yourself, please feel free to do so in the chat. It's always wonderful to see where everyone is coming in from. QCOSS as an organisation has a commitment to working together with Indigenous peoples, and in particular to improving our work as an ally and working towards representation in whatever form that can effectively take Makarrata and to treaty. So for us here in beautiful Meanjin, Brisbane, this is Yagara and Turrbal lands, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Thanks, Danny. So today we're going to be looking at the use of data in applications for grants and tenders. This is a big trend in applications these days. There hasn't been the same focus on evidence and data in previous decades, I suppose, but over the last few years we've been seeing assessors really interested in having more evidence-based applications. So we'll be looking at why that is the case before we have a quick look at some of the reliable sources you might like to be becoming familiar with, some steps to effectively finding and using data, including Amy's introduction for us to Data Point, which is a fabulous resource she has been developing over a long time, and which is just incredibly valuable particularly for community organisations. And then we're going to have a look at integrating that into a funding application. And you will find a couple of resources that I emailed out earlier today will really help when it comes to that integration piece, which we're going to look at right at the end. And our aim is that by the time we wrap up today, you will have some strategies for demonstrating your understanding of your cohort and the issues they're experiencing, how those line up with the grant purposes, particularly for Skilling Queenslanders for work, how to show using data that there is need for the kind of project that you're putting together, and how to support the statements in your application with authoritative information. But I like to think that the overall sort of purpose of today and of using data in general is something that Amy has said before, and that I like to keep in mind with these things is that ultimately the purpose for effectively learning to effectively use data, is that it helps us better identify and specify what problems are and then create accurate theories for solving problems. So let's look at our why quite briefly before we get into the meat of it. So when it comes to Skilling Queenslanders for Work and other grants, there's a few really particular reasons that we would want to use data, or perhaps more accurately, why the grant application assessors want us to use data. The first is to see evidence that the kind of project that's being proposed really is needed. The next is because it can help demonstrate that you really well understand your cohort, your community, the socioeconomic conditions that you're working within and that you have to help people address, where those create barriers to employment, all of those sorts of things. We might be able to find some data that supports the kind of project that we're suggesting would be useful. And finally, and this is more for an internal purpose rather than for your assessor, though they'll like to see that you understand this as well, is that data can create a baseline for then evaluating how effective and what the outcomes of a project are. So on the point of why we might use data, if you do have any questions about how assessors might look at data in particular, I know that can be a source of questions in some of our tender writing workshops, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A function, and the same goes for all of the other bits and pieces that we talk about today. Either I or Amy will be monitoring the chat, so any questions you have, you're welcome also to bring yourself off mute for a bit of a chat or just pop them in the chat function there. So some of the reliable resources and the ones that we use quite regularly at QCOSS are the ones that come out of government agencies or university or other research bodies. And Amy's going to take you through quite a few of these, which you can access through Data Point a little bit later. So we're going to start with the Australian Bureau of Statistics maps, which I really enjoy, partly because they're interactive and visual, and I find that really useful in helping orient me. We're going to look, we have actually mentioned in the resources, the Queensland Treasury's regional profiles, which are really useful for getting a sense of populations, different communities, and demographics, as well as workforce statistics in different statistical areas. I think it's the local government areas, or LGAs, for regional profiles, although Amy can correct me on that if I'm wrong there. And are really useful because you can select multiple areas to compare between. So, for example, just this morning, I was looking at a couple of neighbouring local government areas that have quite different demographics, and I could use the report that came out to show how levels of need could be higher in one community as opposed to another. FIDU is the Population Health Information Development Unit, so you can see why they use an initialism there. This is a place for really useful employment statistics, and you can sort of arrange them by different features like the local government area, primary health areas, Indigenous areas of statistical sort of information gathering, which is handy. Labour and Employment is another Australian Bureau of Statistics, or ABS, a source. We'll keep coming back to ABS throughout this. They're really, really useful. Again, we've got employment, participation and unemployment, which is exactly what you would expect from a labour and employment database. There's a Jobs and Skills Atlas, which has national, state, territory and regional labour market information, which you can make sense of by occupation and industry, which is particularly useful if you are looking at evidencing the need for a Skilling Queenslanders for Work training program in your region. The small area labour markets are another look at participation and unemployment statistics, and they're particularly in smaller statistical areas. So what's called SA2, which is statistical area 2, or local government areas there. The Department of Social Services has some useful payment and work or study engagement information, which you can use as a sort of proxy for unemployment, which is useful. And finally, Jobs Queensland has the Anticipating Future Skills portal, which is really interesting because it shows estimates of how particular industries are going to grow over time. So again, if you're trying to demonstrate that a particular type of training is going to be useful in your area, you can show, for example, that the demand for workers in that industry is likely to increase because that industry growth has been projected there. So those are the key ones that we use and that we keep coming back to. But the good news is that you can find a whole lot of information in just the one place, which is the Data Point portal that Amy is going to introduce in a moment. This is a really useful central spot that you can go to access data that is up to date. It's relevant because it's focused on issues that are of core concern to the community sector, and it's reliable, which I think is really, really important. You know, we know there are dodgy data sources out there, and if you're not really familiar with data, you might be concerned about what sources are worth using, and Data Point sources have all been critically evaluated. These are also ones that Amy is really familiar with and uses a lot in QCOSS projects. The handy thing is, because it's all in one place and it's quite easily or intuitively searchable, if you're used to using, you know, a few filtering and search functions for everything from, you know, online shopping to a library, you'll be able to figure out how to sort through the data here or the data sources here and find things that would be useful to you. The data sources themselves and the visualizations and tools that have been selected have been chosen specifically because they are user-friendly and freely available. So the idea is that by providing this sort of one-stop shop for your data, we're able to support the capacity building for data in the community sector, which we know is in really high demand at the moment. And you can pretty quickly find where you need to get to, because you have a whole lot of areas of particular focus for QCOSS that you can just sort of click on and get a shortcut to. So those highlights there: housing, children and young people, youth justice, living affordability, women's equality and community services are the key ones at the moment. Amy has popped a link to Data Point in the chat, so you can open it if you would like to, and you'll also find links embedded throughout the presentation. So when you get the slides, you can just click through there as well. But on that note, I will hand over to Amy for a few minutes for an introduction to finding Data Point and finding your way around it.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Okay, thank you so much, Kelly. Yeah, it's really lovely to be here with you today, and thank you to Kelly for inviting me to speak at your webinar. So Kelly's already done a wonderful acknowledgement of country. I'd also like to acknowledge I'm joining you from Meanjin in Brisbane, and respectfully acknowledge Yagara and Turrbal people, and all First Nations colleagues and friends are joining us online today. So like Kelly said, my name is Amy Dellett and I'm the Senior Data Analyst in the Research and Policy team at QCOSS. So part of my role is I coordinate a research and evaluation network for community services in Queensland, which includes webinars and an online forum. And I also coordinate a new data insights network for the domestic family and sexual violences services sector that was launched last week. And another part of my role is around data capability. So that is internal to QCOSS, but also supporting our members and the community sector to use, analyse, understand and make meaning of all things data. So the first, like Kelly's done already a great overview of Data Point, so probably don't really introduce too much more of it, but just like she mentioned, it's meant to be intuitive and user-friendly, and specifically designed for the community services sector to improve access and to navigate your way around data. So you can find, so I already shared the link, but you can find Data Point on our website. So under policy and advocacy, we have a data hub, and we've also got Data Point. And so you can access Data Point directly or through the data hub as well. It's kind of two ways to find it there. So this is the actual interface of Data Point, which updates each time we edit or add a new data source. So you can see Data Point, it's kind of sorted in terms of the data sets that have been most recently updated. So you can see this one was edited on the 13th of September, which was Friday last week. So as we mentioned, we kind of are really trying hard to keep this up to date, and so it's got the latest available data and it links directly to the data source itself. So from this main screen, you can filter your searches by using the search by category function. So Kelly's already talked about the different categories that we've kind of grouped the data in. There's also an option to filter your searches by the search by agency filter, and then you would select the agency of interest. So these are typically the data custodians. If there's multiple data custodians, it would be the main point of who has published the data source. You can also use a plain text search. So it would literally just be typing in a keyword and clicking, that would then come up with any of the data sets related to that keyword, and you would click into the data set itself. And that will take you directly to the data source to explore. So that's the first demo of Data Point. We'll keep using it and navigating it as we go through the presentation. Back to you, Kelly. You're on mute.
Put myself on mute while Amy was speaking, and then if she wasn't there to help, I would have just been speaking on mute for ages before I realised it. Thanks, Amy. All right, so Amy's going to take us through some of the Data Point resources a little bit later when we look at particular kinds of data that other people have collected that you might use in your application, but that doesn't mean that's all of the data that you need or can make use of. There's also really important types of data that you will have within your organisations. So things like your organisation might have some research that you have been funded to do or have managed to resource yourself into your particular community, into your service users, into a particular issue in your local area where you have work responsibilities. So that was one source that you could think about if your organisation does that kind of work. You may also have project or program reports, and they can be a really under-recognised source of really valuable information as well. So, for example, if you have been delivering a mental health program over under other funding for several years, then probably each year your mental health team will have put together a report on things like access to the service, the numbers, the amount of demand, the referrals, the kinds of issues that are coming up, and the kinds of work that the team does that helps people overcome those issues, feedback about what works, what could be improved, and all of those sorts of things. And that's actually a really valuable source of data as well. And similarly, you might have data about projects that you've previously managed on short-term grants, which could be really useful in terms of supporting your claims about your organisation's capacity to manage grant funding and to get effective outcomes for it, which fits into a couple of the Skilling Queenslanders for Work criteria. And the kind of insights that you get into. Maybe you've been doing work with a particular participant group who you want to focus on for SKU, for example. You can, again, use reports into any projects or programs that are focused on that participant group to demonstrate your understanding of the group, your understanding of the barriers to training or employment that are highlighted by the work done with that group, all of those sorts of things. So while our focus today is on publicly available sources of data, particularly from those authoritative sources that we've got in Data Point there, that's not to suggest that there aren't really valuable sources of information that you could otherwise, well, you might otherwise already have or could collect. So even think about things like interviews with participants or community members, case studies, those sorts of things. Of course, you have to navigate any ethical issues around sort of consent and what information you share and that sort of thing. But I just wanted to highlight that there's a whole lot of information that you can use that is really valuable data that isn't part of what we're focusing on today. So when we look at that publicly available sort of published data that we're focusing on today, there's really a 4-step process to find relevant data and then make use of it for, well, whatever purpose you have, but in terms of today's purpose, particularly for grant writing. We're going to take you through these steps in Amy's demonstrations and also in a case study that I'll introduce in a moment. But in short, the first step is to explore your geography, so figure out the area that you're looking at. You're then going to define the group of interest to you. So for the purposes of a SKU grant, that's probably going to be the group that you're looking at making up your participants. Then exploring some of the issues that are of interest to you. So again, in SKU terms, that might be things like the rates of particular challenges in your community, the things that would be barriers to employment, and then finding ways to summarise the data so that you can usefully use it in your application. Now, the case study that we are working on is I am youth focused in some ways because, as some of you have been at previous webinars might know, I started out in the community sector in a youth and family organisation that actually ran a previous iteration of Get Set for Work. So I have a bit of a soft spot for those ones. So our case study for today is a fictional organisation. I do want to stress that this isn't based on a real organisation. But a realistic scenario for someone who might be interested in applying for SKU. We've got TYF, the Toowoomba Youth and Family Service. That's a community organisation with loads of experience focused on, of course, supporting young people and families. And the staff are particularly concerned that there are limited employment opportunities for young people in the Toowoomba region. They also know there's heaps of construction going on, so they think delivering a certificate program in construction to help young people get an entry-level job in the construction industry is probably going to be a good idea. But in order to evidence this project, they're going to need to show, among other things, that within their local community, they have the relevant demographic group. So in this case, it would be, say, 15 to 24-year-olds. That there are a whole lot of members of that demographic group that aren't currently engaged in employment or education because otherwise they don't have a relevant participant group for their program. And some indicators that there is demand for more entry-level construction workers than is currently being met in the area. And there will also be other forms of data that could be useful in different parts of their application, but these are probably the key things that they absolutely must evidence using data in order to demonstrate that there's a need for their project. So I will hand over again to Amy, who is going to look at that first step, exploring your geography.
Okay, so the first tool, like I mentioned, is, like Kelly mentioned, I'm going to show you is ABS Maps. So this is for step 1 of the process. ABS stands for the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and this tool doesn't actually contain any data itself. So it's more a way to think about your data, thinking about your service delivery area or your footprint or the community where you deliver services to. So it's about location, country, geography, and what the ABS refers to as boundaries. So in Data Point, we're going to go to search by agency, which is the Australian Bureau of Statistics, or you can also search for it by under category, under general statistics here, or you could search as well and just, for example, search maps. So if we do it that way, it'll come up with all of the relevant data sets that are related to maps, and it's this ABS maps link here. So if we click it, it takes us directly to the tool that we want to use. So I thought I'll also share a direct link in the chat as well, just in case you want to follow along in different ways with using Data Point or not using Data Point. And I've also shared another link around understanding more about geographies too. This is an interactive map that displays the Australian Statistical Geography Standard, or ASGS boundaries. And so you can zoom in and click on particular areas of interest to bring up the code or the name of the region. Alternatively, you can also use the search function here, and you can search for your region or code name of interest as well, or even street address. So maps really gives you a quick sense of the size of each of the geographies using a simple search. And this information will really help you get specific about your community. So in this example, I'm going to do a search based on Toowoomba in Queensland, based on the case study, and then show you how to work out the different regions or the names of the regions to help you with that data analysis. So we're going to look for, like Kelly mentioned, the LGA, the SA4, the SA3, and SA2 for Toowoomba. So just before we start the search, I thought I'd also use that link to give you a really quick overview of actually what the geographies look like visually to understand a bit more about the structure. So if you can see here on my screen, so this visual represents the ASGS edition 3. And so these geographies are the way in which community data is released by the government and accessed by most of us using data. So the ASGS provides users with an integrated set of standard areas that can be used for analysing, visualising and integrating stats produced by the ABS and other organisations. And so there's ABS, what's considered ABS structures, which is the top part of the screen here. And there's also some non-ABS structures as well. So mesh blocks, which is in the middle here, are the smallest level of geographies that are defined by the ABS. And these are really designed as geographic building blocks, I guess you could say. And so rather than as areas for the release of statistics. So generally data isn't released by mesh block, but if you can understand it as like an onion perhaps, then it's building up the layers. And so the mesh block is really the inside layer, the smallest level geography. Then we have statistical area 1s, which usually data isn't often released by SA1s. Potentially sometimes there will be population data available, but when you look at anything else, generally it's not released at the SA1 level. So the areas mostly of interest would be statistical area 2, which they generally have a population between 3,000 and 25,000 with an average of about 10,000 people per SA2. And so they're similar to what you would consider a suburb or locality boundary. SA2s in remote and regional areas generally have smaller populations than those in urban areas. And so in Queensland, there are 548 SA2s. In general, SA3s, so the statistical area 3, which is the next level up, are designed to have populations between 30,000 and 130,000 people. However, the creation of more meaningful regional areas often takes priority over population criteria. So as a result, there's some SA3 populations above 130,000, whereas others are actually below 30,000. There's a really, really big difference in population numbers with some of those SA3s. SA3s are often also functional areas of regional towns and cities with a population in excess of 20,000 people, or clusters of related suburbs and urban commercial and transport hubs within major urban areas. So in Queensland, there's 84 SA3s. And then mostly what you'll find and come across data is at the statistical area 4 level. So SA4s have a population of about 100,000 people, and that's to provide sufficient sample size, for example, labour force estimates. So in regional areas, SA4s tend to also have like a smaller population between, say, 100,000 to 300,000 people, whereas in cities, SA4s have a larger population, generally around 300,000 to 500,000 people. And in Queensland, there's 21 SA4s. So they're the ABS structures that you'll probably come across most often, as well as there's also local government areas that you may be familiar with. So they're an ABS approximation of gazetted local government boundaries defined by each state and territory local government department. So they are also built from mesh blocks, so you can see this connection here as that first kind of building block. And in Queensland, there's 80 local government areas. So LGAs also, when you think about it, they can actually change structures over time, so that often can make time comparisons or trend analysis a little bit difficult for local government areas. So generally the community data that you want to focus on is really these SA2s, SA3, SA4, and local government areas. You can also see there's postal areas data there too. So many of you would be familiar with postcodes. But there are a number of issues with using postal areas, including some that go across different states, so outside of Queensland as well. So I just suggest, recommend or avoiding using postal area data if you can. But if that is the only data available, it still can be useful and valuable as well. So any data that's generally smaller than the SA2, I mentioned before, the SA1 or the mesh block is generally not publicly available. But when you do look at the data like income or employment measures, no data will be available at this level. It's the smallest level data will usually be SA2. So if I go back to the first demo, when we're in the map tool, if you think about that structure and those levels or layers or onion layers, if we're going to talk about it like that, think about that as we go through this demo. So first we're going to search for Toowoomba. So using current location. Oh, it wants to know my location. I don't know about that. I'll cross that out. So we'll just search Toowoomba. Oops, if I can spell. And I'll search that and it'll take me to that region or community. You can also play with the tool, so zoom out, zoom in, make sure you're actually on the right location. So sometimes there might be multiple regions that have the same name. So it's always good to just have a play and zoom in and out to ensure you're actually finding the right location that you want to look at in terms of the structure and the geography. So the first thing that we want to do is then use these filter options. So the first selection we're interested in might be a local government area. So if you look down the list, you can find, and remember from that structure, from the structure that we were looking at just before, the ASGS, it's a non-ABS structure. So it's the local government area region there. So the map now shows you the local government areas in the country. If you zoom out all the way, you can see that right across Australia. If you zoom back in, you get that finer level detail and you can find Toowoomba there. If you're unsure or you lose your kind of direction or location, you can look on the map and click, and that blue dot will tell you the information that you're actually interested in knowing. So the local government area and the name is Toowoomba, and there's also a code that I mentioned before, and so that's 36910. You may or may not need to know that information. It's just good to keep in mind that that data does exist, and it's a different way to identify your geography if you need to refer to the code instead of the name. So like I mentioned, you can see that detail here. So you can see the geography type is the local government area, and that's what we've selected in the bar to show us. So the geographies obviously follow the local government, and the colours, the red is the local government region. So you can see Toowoomba is quite a large geography. If we zoom out a little bit, there's Toowoomba here, which is kind of on the edge, but it goes all the way out west and a bit south down here as well. So it's quite a large geographic region. But it actually cuts off, yeah, quite close to the east of Toowoomba, and it doesn't include Gaddon or further north, which Esk is around up here. So I guess it's just nice to know the landscape of the community that you're looking at within that region. So back to Toowoomba, now we know the LGA name. We're going to apply the exact same steps to find the statistical area 4, which is in which Toowoomba sits within. So instead of selecting local government area, we're just going to select the drop-down box again. And this time it's a ABS structure, and it's called Statistical Area 4 or SA4. I'm going to select that, and that applied directly to the tool. So now you can see that this is the statistical area 4 for Toowoomba. So it looks quite different to what we're talking about. If we're talking about local government areas, it's really quite different to statistical area 4 data. So just to keep that in mind when you're looking at information for your own community. So again, if you want to click into the blue dot as Toowoomba, it'll now tell you that it's the statistical area 4 and the name is Toowoomba. Sometimes you'll find with geographies, it won't necessarily be the name that you know your local community as. So just keep in mind. So Toowoomba is Toowoomba this time, but sometimes it might not be. You can also see here that the SA4 for Toowoomba actually includes Gaddon, whereas the local government area didn't. So that's one of the big differences with these geographies. And so you can start to really understand the importance of statistical geographies and how we use and understand data. And this will really help us later when we're actually looking at some of the data sets. So another useful function of this tool is that you can compare two different regions. So you can use this tool to check for your community of interest, for example, what we've just done manually, but we can also compare them side by side. So is the LGA the same or the SA4, is it different? Or is the LGA a smaller or larger region or geography than the SA4 for that region? And so you can use the map tool to actually test this out, which is where the choose your second boundary drop-down option comes in handy. And you can use this to select to overlay the local government area with the statistical area 4, and then zoom into your area of interest and see that if they are the same or if they're different, and whether there are slight differences or overlap with other communities of interest as well. So if we use the same functionality as before, I'll keep the first selection as statistical area 4, and then the second selection will select local government area. And now you can see that there's two selections applied to the map. So the local government area is these blue lines, and the statistical area 4 is the red line. So if we zoom out as well, we can see we now know that the local government area is much larger, because we can see that on the map, much larger than the statistical area 4, and that they don't really directly align across their borders at all. There's actually only this amount of overlap compared to the whole kind of space. So you can also do this if you want to compare other regions. So for example, like if you wanted to compare the SA4 and the SA3, and we can do that again the exact same way. So if we keep this statistical area 4 or SA4 in the first selection, we can go and select the second selection, which is the statistical area 3. And you can actually see in this example that they match directly. So it's an exact match. It's really interesting, and definitely that's not always the case. Usually SA3s are a smaller area than the SA4, which makes sense because the SA4s are then the building blocks of the sorry, the SA3s are the building blocks of the SA4. But in this instance, because the SA4 and the SA3 are the same, you may also want to look at smaller geographies as well in the data at a more granular level, which may be the statistical area 2 level. So remembering that SA2s are generally the smallest level of data that we have available. So if we repeat these steps and search the first box as statistical area 2, which is then the ABS structure again, statistical area 2. And then the second selection is the statistical area 3. You can see the SA3 blue line and the SA2s are the red line. So if we zoom in here, you can see this blue outline as the SA4, and then all of these smaller structures are the SA2s. And that makes sense because that matches that diagram that I initially showed you as well. So you can see that there are actually a lot of SA2s that make up this SA3 or SA4 region. In fact, there's actually 15. If you go in and click and you count them, I won't show you all of them because that'll take a little bit too much time, but you're welcome to just like play around with the tool, and you can click and you can see when I click into this area, it's saying the statistical area is Wilsonton. And then the statistical area 2, sorry, is Wilsonton. And then the statistical area 3 is Toowoomba. Or for example, around here, it's saying it's Drayton Harristown. Over here is Cambodia, Warimia. Sorry if I'm pronouncing these locations wrong. And Toowoomba West, for example. So those are a few of the SA2s within this region. So as you look at the data points for the regions, you can decide whether you want to include or exclude these regions from your grant writing application. And these data regions give you a lot of flexibility to customize your particular region of interest. So you can say with the data that you're looking at, you can just aggregate or sum some of these SA2s, or you can aggregate them all to make up that SA3 as well. So really a lot of flexibility with the data. Or you can also do the opposite, which is disaggregating. So you can take up the SA3s and just separate them out into all of the smaller area regions, which is the SA2s. So it's also really good to be aware of the limitations around your data, because data may not always be available at this level of data of detail that you want as well. If it is hard, just a tip, if you can't tell the difference between the lines on your map, sometimes it's really useful just to swap over your selections, and that might help you visually see the differences between the regions as well. And also utilizing like the zoom functionality is really helpful too. Sometimes the regions are really small, so you have to zoom in really closely. Another thing to keep in mind about this zoom option is that maps can often really mask small area differences in data too. So just really remember to use that zoom functionality and see the lowest level location that you can drill down to. If you want to also be more exact than this, it's often useful to have geographical information systems or data visualization systems available where you can overlay some of the data against the specific boundaries. But I think generally this mapping tool is a really great tool. It'll meet most of your needs in terms of understanding geographies through a data lens. So that's the first the demo done for the understanding your geography, and I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back to Kelly.
Thanks, Amy. I remembered to take myself off mute this time. So as a bit of a summary of what Amy found is, you search for your town or your region and explore your local area. Think about what sorts of areas you need to be gathering information for, but also consider, as Amy said, those bigger areas tend to be more statistically sort of reliable, whereas things can get a little bit trickier if you're wanting to make claims based on data when you're getting down to those smaller areas that have really small populations. But think too about the level of detail that you need to provide. You might need to go down to a really sort of detailed description of a small area and that's fine. Just be clear that what your limitations are when you're dealing with data from that small area. But on another level, think about, you know, and if we go to the point of that local government area for Toowoomba, which you can see is that giant one that's actually, you know, expanded beyond the edges of that image there. Toowoomba, the LGA goes out way west, I think gets close to Roma, and that might not be, you know, there's a whole lot of information there that might not be relevant to you. So just think about what sort of area you want to collect information for, and then what level is going to be the most useful for you and for your purposes. So if we're thinking about our TIFF case study, we might, if we were planning a program here, look at ABS maps and find that the LGA is just too big and has too many sort of non-Toowoomba people who wouldn't, you know, who really wouldn't be able to attend our program, you know, if we're looking at delivering in Toowoomba itself. So we might think, look, that's too big. And it also doesn't include some areas that we think could be useful. You know, maybe we think someone, you know, we could run a program that brought people in from Gatton, for example, but Gatton isn't in that Toowoomba LGA. So the LGA is probably not what we want to be using. It's too big. At the other end of the spectrum, that SA2 or suburb level is probably a bit too small. But depending on the size of our program and our delivery area, we might say, you know, if we're running things on the south side of Toowoomba, we might sort of capture the information from 5 or 6 of those more southerly SA2s and combine that together if that was going to be useful to us. But probably that matching SA3 or SA4 is going to be the go, at least as we're first starting to explore the information. You know, that's going to help us get a good sense of what the actual location for delivery, if we're delivering it in Toowoomba, looks like, but also some of those surrounding areas and where people are really frequently coming in from to Toowoomba. But we might also consider some other areas. There might be the public health network or PHN area, areas where information is collected for particular types of services like child protection or housing services. Sometimes there are state development or infrastructure or resource regions. We might even look at an electorate level. Those are all sorts of things we might explore if there are particular types of information that we're looking for. But chances are, at least as a first stage, we're going to be looking at SA3 and SA4. So our next step is to think about what our group of interest is going to be. And this can get a little bit tricky because there are multiple uses of the term population when it comes to statistics. So was there a question there? I thought I had no. Okay, all good. For example, with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, a population is generally defined as the ERP or estimated resident population, and that is, and I quote, the official measure of Australia's population based on the concept of usual residence. It refers to all people, regardless of nationality or citizenship, who usually live in Australia, with the exception of foreign diplomatic personnel and their families. So again, if we're then looking at the population within the SA4, we could expect it to be all of the people who usually live in that area. But when we look at research studies, for example, experiments or pseudo experiments or intervention studies in academic journals and those sorts of things, the term population often refers to everyone who's within a group of interest for a particular research question. So that might be, you know, an educational psychology team might be looking at all students who have a disability within Queensland, and that would be their research population, even though it's not the resident population. So we just need to be a little bit careful when we're trying to make sense of data. So if we're using population data, we need to know what population means for the particular publication that we're using. For some questions, the full population, so that estimated resident population for a given area, it might be your, one of those statistical areas, your town, your city, that sort of thing. You might want information about that. So, for example, if you're looking at evidencing the need for your program by showing that there are more socioeconomically disadvantaged people in your region, you might use the population mean income for your region and show that that's significantly lower than the mean income for another region, right? So you might use that estimated resident population sort of definition or research using that definition that way. But you might also look for research with or data about a particular group that you want to focus on. So for some of those SKU programs that have age criteria, you might be looking at everyone within a particular area who is within that age group. Or you might look at other SKU target groups. So recently, people who have been recently released from prison, for example, people who have served in the Australian Defence Force and their families. That will be another group that you're looking at. So you have to think when you're asking a research question or you're looking for information, what's the group that you're focusing on? And chances are for any given project, you'll be looking at research that focuses on a few different groups. But you might also want to think about that whole of population sort of level of data as well there. So for our case study, for example, we've already identified that we're going to be focusing on young people. So that's going to be 15 to 24-year-olds. And we know that we're looking at the Toowoomba area and we're looking at that SA3 or SA4 level. That would be our group of interest there to start with. So then we look at what are the issues or challenges or social conditions that are of particular interest to us in terms of how they affect that group. So that might be, we know that within any given population, resident population, there are going to be loads of people who are employed, but there are also going to be a proportion who are unemployed, disengaged from education, that sort of thing. And it may be that we want to look at how many or what proportion of people within our group of interest experience particular barriers to education or have a low level of employment. We might like to look at some other things that create barriers to social engagement or employment, and that could be particular kinds of family issues, health issues, things that aren't about the individual themselves often, but are about the structures or the systems they're within, such as areas that aren't serviced effectively by public transport, for example, or rates of discrimination within a particular industry, those sorts of things. So once we've got our area in mind and we know the group that we're focused on, we can then start digging more to find out more about that detailed stuff. And the key question to think about here, or that at least that I find useful to think about, is what is the thing that we're trying to demonstrate or to measure? And in terms of your SKU applications, that's going to be those things that support the points you're making often about the need for a particular program in your given area. So with that, I will hand back to Amy to have a look at some of those data sources that we talked about before that might be of particular relevance for you in your SKU or other grant applications.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So yeah, I thought I'd walk you through 3 examples of data sources if we've got time that you may find useful for your grant applications. So these are the 3 I thought we'd look at. So the Queensland Regional Profiles by Queensland Treasury to look for the population data. And then the learning or earning data from FIDO, the Population Health Information Development Unit, which will give you an indication of your population at small area levels that the population that may be eligible for SKU initiatives. And then looking at the Queensland Labour Force data, which is the ABS data compiled by Queensland Treasury, which we'll look at for youth unemployment figures as well. So there definitely are more data sets that will be available and useful to you, but I'd really encourage you to explore Data Point and identify those other data sources. And you're more than welcome to reach out to QCOSS as well if you need any additional data guidance or support. So for the first demo with these ones, we're going to use Data Point again. We're going to search either looking by agency, which will be Queensland Treasury. Queensland Treasury, and you can see there's 10 different data sets. Or the other way, you can look at the search by category, which is under general statistics, or as well, I might just use the search functionality and search profile. And so we'll look for the Queensland Treasury, and they're called the Queensland Regional Profiles, and you can see Queensland Treasury is the data custodian for this. So we'll click into the data set now. So this takes us directly to the Queensland Regional Profiles platform on the Treasury website. And I'll share this link with you in the chat as well if you want to follow along. So for this example, I'm going to show you how the Queensland Regional Profiles are good to find population data for the different regions of interest for the community. So in this example, we use Toowoomba and its surrounding regions. So step one, it actually takes you through the steps. So it's a really intuitive tool. So step one, we're going to select the different report type of interest. And so for this example, we'll use resident. I'm then going to select the region type of interest, and so we're going to keep this selection as local government area. In the search box, I'm going to search for Toowoomba and select that there, and you can see on the map it's selecting the Toowoomba local government area. We're going to keep the select a comparison region as Queensland, as the state comparison. And then in this blue hyperlink, we're going to show the topics that are of interest. And you can see by default, all of the topics are selected, which may be a little bit overwhelming to start with, but you can see there's a lot of data and information available in these profiles. So for the example, I'm going to clear all of the checked topics and just select the ones that I'm interested in looking at for the population data. So under demography, there's the estimated resident population, which Kelly's already explained the definition for. And there's also the population by age and sex. So I'm going to select these with the tick box. And you can also see that these data are updated on the 30th of June 2023. So this is more recent data than the census, which is really data that we're looking for. We're looking for really the most up-to-date information available. You can also see there may be of other topics here that may be of interest to you. So for example, there's population projections, there's migration. Here you can see migration, population projections. There's country of birth as well. So some of them are a bit more older. They're from the latest census. There's a religious affiliation, family composition, and really a lot more in there as well. So again, it might be relevant to your application. So in this example, we're just going to select those first two. We're going to scroll down and then selecting the output type. So you can select PDF or HTML. So either is okay. Generally, HTML works better if you want to copy and paste any data directly into like an Excel spreadsheet, for example, or you might feel more comfortable with PDF, which is totally fine as well. Then we'll just select create report. And it will just take a little minute to generate the report. So you can see that the report is now generated. It's saying that the profile has been created for Toowoomba local government area, and it was generated on today's date, the 17th of September. So we can scroll down here to find, so past the region of overview, and we're going to look for the population data. Oh, I think I selected the PDF. That's okay, we'll do that. So the table 1 here is the estimated resident population data. So here we're finding the estimated resident population, or ERP, for Toowoomba. And we can see the dates of the last, so 2013, 2018, and the 2023 data is preliminary, and that's the one that we're interested in looking at. So you can see, so from 30th of June 2023, the population of Toowoomba is 181,821 persons, and it also says that in the big box there as well. You can also find a direct comparison for Queensland straight underneath it. So for Queensland, it's saying there's 5,460,420 people living in Queensland, or estimated resident populations for Queensland. If we scroll down to the second table, it will give us the breakdowns for our age groups of interest. So we're interested in the 15 to 24-year-old age groups. And so we can see that the number of 15 to 24-year-olds in Toowoomba LGA is 23,307. I'll just zoom in so you can see those numbers a bit better there. And that's the total population of the 15 to 24-year-olds in Toowoomba LGA. And you can see that's also 12.8% of the total population of Toowoomba. We can also again find the Queensland data underneath it, and it's saying that there's 698,957 15 to 24-year-olds in Queensland, and again they make up 12.8% of the total Queensland population. So the age structures for Toowoomba and Queensland when it comes to the proportion of 15 to 24-year-olds is similar for Toowoomba as it is for overall Queensland. And we're also looking at, if you're interested in looking at other age cohorts, you can see that this isn't the case for the 0 to 14-year-olds. So Toowoomba has a higher proportion of 0 to 14-year-olds at 19.3%. Compared to Queensland, which is 18.4%. So generally a slightly younger population. I thought we might try one more example using this tool. So if we just go back to the previous page, and we're going to look at statistical area level 3 now as well. So the previous example, we've done the local government area. So we're going to select the same option. So we've got the resident selected as the report type. And then instead of the local government area, we're going to change this to SA3. And then we're going to use the search function now as well. And we're going to search Toowoomba. And so Toowoomba's SA3 is also still called Toowoomba, but again, it might be different depending on your own region. And you can see on the map visually as well that it is that slightly smaller geography and what we looked at on the ABS Maps tool as well. Keep Queensland as the comparison region, and then we're going to select and show the topics and make sure the ones that we're still interested are selected. So we're still interested in looking at the estimated resident population and population by age and sex. So again, scroll down, and this time we'll select the HTML as the output, and then you'll be able to see the difference between the reports. And so we'll create report. It's just thinking. Okay, so here you can see it's in the HTML format. And it's saying it's now the Toowoomba Statistical Area 3, created and generated on the 17th of September. And so we're going to scroll down again past the region overview. and find that estimated resident population data that we're interested in. So a really nice thing to know about the SA3 reports is that it actually also includes SA2 data for your region as well. And so this is true for the resident profile population when you select that type of report. So it's telling you that the SA3 region, and these are all of the SA2s that are in that region. Like I mentioned before, there's 15. So there's lots of small area levels within the SA3 Toowoomba region. So if we zoom into table 1 just a bit more closely so you can see that. So we already know the Queensland data because we looked at that before, but here we're interested in looking at the population data for Toowoomba SA3. And if you remember, that's actually exactly the same data as the SA4 as well. So in this case, you wouldn't look at the SA4 and the SA3 reports because they're going to tell you the exact same information. So the Toowoomba SA3, in terms of population, we've got 170,792 persons in the Toowoomba SA3. We can also, like I mentioned, look at the SA2 data here. So for example, Toowoomba West, if we're looking at this second last line, they have 17,223 persons, which is like the largest estimated resident population in their region. And then they, in comparison to say, for example, North Toowoomba, Harlexton, which is only then 6,549 persons in that particular SA2 of that region. So if we scroll down as well, we can look at table 2 again, looking at the breakdowns by age. And so this table should look familiar now. So we're interested in the 15 to 24 year age group. And so the number of 15 to 24-year-olds in Toowoomba SA3 is 22,693. And that's 13.3% of the total population, the SA3 population of Toowoomba. Again, we can also look at the SA2 data here and the breakdowns for that different age groups. So in terms of proportions, if we're looking at this column here, we'd be looking at the highest percentage of 15 to 24-year-olds. And so that, for example, is Gatton at 16.3%. And then also, or you could look at like raw numbers as well. So you could find what SA2 in the region actually has the highest number of 15 to 24-year-olds. And that is Toowoomba West down here, and it's 2,468. So interestingly, again, you can see like local level differences coming through in the data. And so, for example, you can see with the 0 to 14-year-olds, if we're looking at this first column, Gowrie, Queensland over here, this, I'll just highlight that for you. So they have a higher proportion of 15 to 24-year-olds, and that's 25.6%. Whereas if you look at, say, Wilsonton, for example, which is this last row here, they have a much smaller, younger population as a proportion of their total population. So that's only 16.9%. So if you scroll across or look across the row, you can look at, say, for example, the 65-year age groups, and you can see that they actually have a really high percentage of 65-year-olds. So their population, or this particular area within the Toowoomba SA3, really has a lot more 65-year-olds at 25.3% of their overall community structure. And so these data really have implications and also insights when you're looking at delivering services to these regions, or for what your workforce will look like now and into the future. So that's the overview of the first, the population data and that tool that we're looking at. So I might take you back to Data Point to now look at the next one of interest. So if we just go back to Data Point, So for this next activity, we're going to look at the earning and learning data. And so that might be the number of young people engaged in learning or earning in school or other education or employed, and as well as the proportion of young people engaged in learning and earning as well. So for each geography or community we're interested in, you can apply this same step or the same logic. So for the learning and earning indicator, the best data source that I found was that was really relatively easy to use is the FIDO dataset, which is published by Torrens University Australia. And I really like this data source because it's packaged in a way that's kind of pretty easily accessible, and the data documentation for this product is quite good as well. So back into Data Point, we're going to search by agency. You can look for actually, it's remembered my selection from previously, so you can either backspace. If you still have an issue with it still filtering, you can always refresh the page, and that will take you to the full list again. So to find FIDO, you could search for FIDO. You could also look in the category, which is under community services, or you can also search by agency, and that would be under Torrens University. So we'll select that one, and that's the only data source with that from that agency. So we'll click onto that, and that'll take us into the resource. I'll share this link in the chat with you as well, so you have access to the direct data source too. So FIDO has a number of workbooks available for the whole of Australia, but it's also really nicely broken down to state level data as well. And then smaller geographies too. So when you click on the link, on the drop down links, it'll show you visually which state or territory you're interested in looking at. And obviously the focus for today is on Queensland. And in this example, so I'll take you through two examples. We've got the local government area and also the statistical area 3 examples as well. So for the first one, you can see it's population health areas. So we don't want this one, we want the second option, which is the local government areas. And then we'd select the blue icon for Queensland. And when you click on that, it will say you can select to download. I suggest doing that because then you can actually interact with the data file. You'll find some of the functionality is limited if you keep it open in an online view. So I'm just going to pull up the data that I saved earlier for the local government areas, just so you can see the interactive version. So this data set is often updated and it's regular. So this one, you can see it's last published in June 2024. And we're looking at the third tab, which is the table of contents. So if you open that, it's already kind of come up with my pre-selection, which was I was looking to find learning or earning. So you could do a quick search to find what you're interested in, or you can actually just browse all the topics that are available. There's a lot of data in this tool. So once we've found the learning and earning, we're going to click into that, and it'll take us to the information that we're interested in looking at. So I clicked in to the indicator using my mouse and taking me to this file. So we have the learning or earning data, which you can see up the top here for 15 to 24-year-olds for each of the local government areas in Queensland. I can then do another search, so using Control F, and we're going to look for Toowoomba local government area. So it finds that pretty quickly. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see my screen a bit better in terms of the data. So we're looking at Toowoomba local government area, and I'll just highlight Toowoomba as well so you can see that more clearly too. So it also tells me, so it's telling me the number of people that are learning or earning at ages 15 to 24. And it's also telling me the percentage that are learning or earning at ages 15 to 24. So it's calculated that percentage for us, so we don't need to do it ourselves. So you can see there's 18,573 people learning or earning in the Toowoomba LGA, and the percentage is 84.8%. So that means 84.8% of people aged 15 to 24 years are either learning or earning, which means approximately 15.2% are not. If you scroll down the page, you can also find the state level data as a comparison, which is quite helpful. So you can see here there's the Queensland data. And so if we're looking at and comparing, we can think about what the difference is between how Toowoomba compares with Queensland overall. So Queensland, there's 83.7% of people aged 15 to 24 years learning or earning. So you can see that that's kind of quite similar. So I would suggest, looking a little bit deeper into the data sets because you want to find differences and think, 84.8% for Toowoomba is quite similar to 83.7% for overall Queensland. So what I would suggest then is instead of looking at the local government area data, you could then go back to the FIDO data source and look for other different areas. So I'll just close out of these ones. And if you remember going back here, there was also the option to select these population health areas. So these are actually really useful. They give you more deeper level data at a smaller area level. And it's really helpful when we're looking for within region variations in the data. So for example, looking at the SA3 data and then drilling down, also looking at the SA2 level data as well. So this time I'm going to select the Queensland data for population health areas. And again, it will ask me to download and save the file. And so I'm just going to pull up the one that I've already got opened as well. So this is the Population Health Atlas of Australia, Queensland, and you can see there's the population health areas. If we go back into the contents page, we've already got the learning and earning selected again, so I'll click into that. And you can see now also it's exactly the same layout of the data. There's just these different regions here that are listed. So they're not local government areas anymore. If you look up the top of the column, you can see there's the link to statistical area 3s or 4s. And so it's that data instead. So the population health areas are kind of a unique combination of statistical area 2 and statistical area 3 and statistical area 4 data and aggregated in a way that can be used and meaningful to the sector. So we're going to look for Toowoomba again. So if I search for, say, Toowoomba, it'll come up and I've selected the areas that are of interest, because if you remember back to my previous example, there's actually 15 SA2s that are of interest within the Toowoomba region. And so it's useful to have a comparison against all of these different communities. So what I've done is actually just applied a really simple data filter, and I'm going to show you just the regions that are of interest for the Toowoomba example. So in here we might filter by the color that I've selected, which is the relevant data for Toowoomba. So for example, we can see the smaller area regions, there's Darling Heights, there's Highfields, Gatton, all of those communities that were of interest when we were playing around with the maps as well. So what we're looking at, for example, we're looking at this kind of distribution across the different communities and looking at the differences and variation. So you can see from this data, for example, Highfields have a really high proportion of 15 to 24-year-olds learning or earning at 93.2% compared to, say, Newtown or North Toowoomba at 79.9%. So this data is a little bit more interesting because it's now starting to show some variation within the region. So the meaningful information here is that we know that there's variation across the 15 to 24-year age cohorts across the communities, and we want to focus our efforts for young people to transition to learning or earning. For example, you may want to look at Newtown and North Toowoomba, or Harlexton and Wilsonton as an area of interest, given that there's a lower proportion of 15 to 24-year-olds learning or earning. So I guess we'll just keep that in mind when we're going through, which is the last steps, and looking at the next data set around unemployment and employment. Sorry, I also just skipped, oh, sorry, I can take a question as well. I just wanted to show one more thing here, which is when you scroll down past these small area levels, it also gives you the data for statistical area 4 and statistical area 3. And so this is also useful to locate, and you can find the data for Toowoomba. And so this bold data is actually the statistical area 4, and the next row is the statistical area 3. And you can see they exactly the same, because in this case, they're the same region. And so the overall statistical area 4 or statistical area 3 is 85.1% for 15 to 24-year-olds learning or earning. Sorry.
No, Amy, I was just going to say we might have to skip the next one because we're running low on time, and have all those tech issues.
Yeah.
I apologise for that, everyone. And if you do need to duck off, though, you'll be able to catch up at the end. On the end, because we will be sharing a recording. So if you do need to leave, you won't miss out on any of that. You'll get the recording either this afternoon or Thursday morning, and you'll be able to catch up. I do apologise, Amy. I know that's another super useful data source that you had lined up. I'm just going to run really quickly through a couple of slides so we can get back into sort of making sense of data for the purposes of your application. And you'll get the presentation slides as well, so you can read through these. I won't belabor the point too much, but largely here just to highlight, it's really important that you summarise the data that you think is important and you note where you got it from. It's otherwise going to get very, very tricky if you're going to try and update it, or, you know, someone's doing a bit of quality assurance and they're double checking that you've got your data reporting correct. And if you want to think about matching types of data to the particular assessment criteria for SKU, we've got some ideas for types of data that might be useful for the different SKU criteria here. Note, however, that you're not expected to use data to back up your responses in all of the criteria. So, for example, in cost or value for money, you're probably not going to use research data or that sort of thing. But these are just how you might, if you want to, or you think it's going to be useful, the kinds of data that you might use. But we think that the use of data is probably most relevant to criteria 2, which is servicing community and industry needs. That's where it appears to be, data appears like it's going to be the most useful. So when we're thinking about our region and our group of interest, if we're looking at that local population, so going on that SA3, which of course is the same as the SA4 data, we've got about 22,500 young people. So in our group of interest there, we can look at proportions, which Amy has already shown us how to do without working it out ourselves. But as we saw with the SA3 data in Queensland, we've got a slightly lower proportion, overall proportion of the population is in that age group, whereas in Toowoomba it's a little bit higher. There are some other handy shortcuts you can use to find some already crunched data that you might like to have a look at. Several regions around Queensland who have worked with us to deliver our town hall series. Amy goes to the local government area information and collects that and puts it together into a report for each of those regions, which is our way of saying thank you to them for their participation in town halls. But also Amy encourages you to go to the Queensland Government Statistical Office for regional profiles for other geographical areas. So if you search QCOSS community profiles, you'll find a page where you can see all of the regions that have a profile for them. And some of the information looks, so demographic information in particular can be useful, and you can see a lot of really relevant stuff summarised here, which is something we've taken directly from the most recent profile. And you might think some of those interesting things would be things like the most disadvantaged quintile, so that's the fifth, the most disadvantaged fifth of the population. So quite a few people in Toowoomba fit into that lowest fifth of the population. So we can sort of see from that it's a more disadvantaged area than many other areas in Queensland, that sort of thing. We can have a look at the comparisons with Queensland in general. We might see that there are, say, a large number of migrants who maybe have languages other than English in an area and use that to support our need for a SKU program that's targeting CALD people, that sort of thing. So there's lots of really interesting things you can see if you have one of those regional profiles for the area you want to deliver in. And Amy's going to talk through a couple of other key things from that report in a minute. In terms of unemployment, so things like the Jobs and Skills Atlas or regional youth unemployment data at statistical area 4 levels are really useful. We're using here often sort of the number who are the proportion who are in the workforce, sort of subtracting that, as Amy did earlier, from the overall population to get an approximate rate of unemployment, or as you'll see soon, sometimes using the proportion who are getting job seeker or youth allowance other in an area, and again subtracting that, and using that as a proxy for unemployment. So if we want to run our young people's program in Toowoomba, we're going to need to evidence the unemployment in that area. And what we can see looking at some of this information is that youth unemployment in the area has been growing. So that might be something we want to add, not just the current youth unemployment rate, but that it is growing, that it's higher than the general Queensland rate. In particular, we might also look at those learning or earning rates. And really interesting, as Amy pointed out earlier, there's quite a lot of variation between those SA2 levels. So Newton had that quite low learning and earning rate compared to somewhere like Toowoomba East, where it was really high. And we might also look at data like research into industry or employment trends that could suggest that there are either industries to focus on training people in or groups that are likely to need additional support. So if you know that an industry in one area is declining, that might indicate that that there's a need for reskilling or career change programs in that area itself. So other statistics we might want to have a look at to support our application, and particularly that criteria to supporting individual and community needs, remembering that we want to deliver a construction program, so we might look at statistics that suggest construction industry growth, previous issues with limited skills workforce, and the significant infrastructure projects that are starting or due to start, which are different source entirely, and one of the lobby groups, so we need to take that into consideration as well, has recently said that there's this growing industry and need there. And population growth is expected to increase. You might have noticed that there's tracking of population growth in some of those sources that Amy looked at earlier. And then we might think about, what does that mean for things like housing stress? And could that be something we then need to consider as a potential barrier to engagement and training and employment? So if I I'm starting to think about not just the shape of the project itself, but what are those additional supports, those wraparound supports we might need to provide. And I know that housing stress is an issue and the population is just expected to keep growing. Maybe that's something I need to explore a little bit further, to have a look around, and we might think about similar things to that when it comes to other problems we know are present, like transport issues or particular types of disability or health problems. So Amy's going to have a chat to you about some of the data from the Toowoomba regional profile that goes to whether we might need to consider housing and homelessness as potential barriers and things that we provide some wraparound support for when it comes to developing our project.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I'll just go through it really quickly. So again, this data source is available in the data point. So the custodians are the Residential Tenancy Authority, or RTA. You can search for it by under the category housing and homelessness, or using just a search function, for example, rents. And it's called the median rents quarterly data. And so this data is really in relation to, housing and rental affordability, and we access these data for all dwellings across local government areas in Queensland. And there's also postcode data as well available on the website if you look at that data source. And so for Toowoomba LGA, you can see the current median rent is $450 as at June quarter 2024. And in the past 4 years, so from June 2020 to June 2024, median rents have increased for Toowoomba by 50%. So this has really big implications for the region. And just one last data source as well. Again, you can find this in Data Point. So you would search under Australian Institute of Health and Welfare as the agency, or you can search under the housing and homelessness search category, or again, you could use the text search, for example, homelessness, and it will come up, and it's called the Specialist Homelessness Services Collection Data Cubes. And clicking on that link will take you to the tool. And so this is the data that we look at from AIHW around a specialist homelessness services collection, and it's the most available data based on the 2022-23 financial year. So these data are broken down by age and gender for each LGA. So for Toowoomba local government area, on the bottom left-hand chart, you can see, I don't think you can see where I'm pointing, but it'll be 1,238 persons accessed specialist homelessness services for that latest financial year. So you can see in the last 12 months, the number of people accessing specialist homelessness services increased by 39%, from 888 people in the previous financial year to 1,238. You can also see that increase reflected across the different age cohorts, and particularly the younger age cohorts as well. So for 0 to 9-year-olds, there was an increase of 108%. For 10 to 19-year-olds, there was an increase by 89%. And then less so for 20 to 29-year-olds, that increased by 19%. So there's also a gendered element to this data as well, with more women accessing these services compared to men. So for example, in 2022-23 data, there was 732 women accessing services, or 59% of the cohort. Back to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Amy. So I hope this has shown how you can start using your knowledge of your community. You can start thinking about what some of those support needs or potential barriers might be that you need to consider in your project planning, and then start digging into the data and see whether there is some information that you could use to back up some of what you plan to do about it in terms of your support strategies, your wraparound supports for participants. So you might look here, for example, at taking that data for the increases in young people's accessing homelessness and housing services and think, okay, so I was right, that's definitely an issue for this cohorts. That's something I'm going to have to think about in planning. And maybe you then decide that you are going to work together, you're going to link up with a local youth service that has a housing arm, or your local housing and homelessness service, so that your participants have a really quick referral pathway, so that if they're homeless or they're experiencing housing insecurity, they've got ready support right there. Or you might have, that service might come on board to help with some tenancy maintenance skills, those sorts of things. And you can show the need for that support and why that support is going to be important by referring back to data like this. And the same goes for all sorts of the challenges that your participants might experience. So a bit of a wrap up, our top tips for using data. Be as current as you can be. Data that is even a couple of years old for really specific things, particular things can be way out of date. And that's not necessarily because issues are resolving. It can be because if you used, as you could see in Amy's data for housing prices, if you were using data from just a year or so ago, it might not show how high things, the housing stress level is now, or how much rents have increased, that sort of thing. So try to be up to date and try to be using that data from your local geographical area. Focus in on the cohort that you look to be working with. I'm going to, in my case study idea, I'm going to focus on the data that relates to young people, because that's much more relevant than data for, housing stress amongst older people, for example. You can make comparisons to show there's a higher need for a particular type of program in your area as compared with another area by using those tools to compare different areas or compare your region with the state average. You can use source data dictionaries. Sorry, I get that one a little bit confused, to help make sense. If you're exploring a data source and you're not sure what something means, they often have data dictionaries or notes that go along with them that you can dig into and find out what the numbers you're looking at really mean. But please as well remember that not only do we have data point and community profiles here at QCOSS, but as Amy said, you're welcome to reach out. Part of our job as a peak, and part of Amy's job in particular, is supporting capacity for using data effectively within the community services. And ultimately, please don't fear data. It can be nerve-wracking to try and work with, especially at first, but you can, use all sorts of resources and reach out to us for help using it, and we are more than happy to help. And I can tell you, as someone who's not a data professional myself, I've played around with Data Point, and it is very user-friendly, and I can quite quickly get really useful information out of it. And I think if I can do it, then probably you can too. We were going to have questions if we had enough time, which we don't today. I really do appreciate your patience with our technical troubles, and for those of you who've been able to stick around, that's really wonderful. But do let us know if you have particular questions. You can reach out to me or to Amy. Amy also runs the Amazing Research and Evaluation Network, which has a whole resources hub on the QCOSS website. There is so much that is useful there, and also has heaps of R&E network webinars and things on YouTube. You can also join the network and connect with other people who are using data in the community sector. I really enjoy the network. As mentioned, not a data professional myself, but I find it really, really useful to hear what they're talking about and explore their resources. And I do find them really valuable for my own understanding and then building my capacity to use data in my work as well. So I encourage you to have a look at those resources and potentially join the network. And other than that, that's pretty much us done. If you do still have a minute left, if you could let us know what you think using Menti. This is one of the tech challenges that we're having, and unfortunately Microsoft hasn't planned to fix it, is that Teams polls no longer work for our guests or external attendees. So if you aren't familiar with Menti, you can just get your phone out and use the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the numerical code at the top of the screen. So if you've opened up menti.com in a browser, that number to enter is 16089536, and it will take you through. There's just 3 really quick questions, and we'd really appreciate getting your feedback on that. That will also stay open for a couple of days. So if you don't have time right now, you can still get on there and give us your feedback, and we'd really, really appreciate it. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again for your patience. We are trying really hard to get these tech issues sorted, but because they're sort of Teams related, we're limited in what we can do on our end. If you're applying for SKU this round, best of luck. Otherwise, you know, any grant or tender experience you have where you make use of this, please feel free to reach out and let us know. Also, let us know what we could do that would further help you with grants and tenders and the other things we focus on. We really do take that feedback on board and build our next lot of offerings around the common feedback that we get. So it would be fabulous to hear from you.